Hi, my name is Kim Miller, and I am an ordained minister in the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. I have also been working in children's ministry since I was about 12 or 13 years old, actually, doing various things in children's ministry. I've taken classes in children's ministry and done a lot of my own reading and research in children's ministry. I have also served as a pediatric chaplain in two different children's hospitals. Brenner's Children's Hospital at Wake Forest Baptist Health in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and at Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis. I served as a chaplain resident in both of those places. And one of the things that I have learned and found over the years is that it doesn't matter whether you're serving in a children's hospital or whether you're serving in a local church or whether you're serving in some rural place out in the middle of nowhere or whether you're serving in a level 1 trauma center. At some point, almost every minister is going to encounter a time where they have a child that they have to reach out to and provide spiritual care to. And a lot of ministers find themselves very uncomfortable when they are dealing with children, when they're working with children, because they feel like they just don't have the support that they need. They don't have the education that they need to be able to understand and offer support to children. And so I wanted to give this didactic in order to give maybe some tools and maybe some understanding to help ministers to be able to deal with children, whether it's a child that has just been diagnosed with a critical illness or whether it's a child that has just lost a loved one or a child who's just been involved in a trauma. I want you to be able to have some tools to be able to minister and meet that child where they are. And so the first thing I want to share with you is a story from a book that I have read about children and children's understanding of spirituality and God. This book is called The Spiritual Life of Children by Robert Coles. Robert Coles, it's a little bit dated. This book is 1990. But Robert Coles was a medical doctor, and a pediatrician, he began to become curious about children's spirituality. And so he went and began to do field research on children and on spirituality and on their understanding of God. And one of the places that he went, he spent some time on a Hopi Indian reservation. And he spent several years there working with children. He started out working with children in the schools, which were run by white Christians that had gone in as missionaries to start schools on this reservation. And when he was with the children in the schools, he found that they were very closed off. They wouldn't speak a lot. They wouldn't talk about what they understood about God and spirituality. And so eventually he migrated into their homes and began to meet with them in their homes. And he found these children were very different in their homes than they were in their schools. And as an example, he talks about this one Hopi girl who he went into her home. And this is what he said. He said, "Here, for example, is what I eventually heard in 1975 from a 10-year-old Hopi girl I had known for almost 2 years. She says, 'The sky watches us and listens to us. It talks to us, and it hopes we are ready to talk back. The sky is where the God of the Anglos lives,' a teacher told us. She asked where our God lives. I said, 'I don't know.' I was telling the truth. Our God is the sky and lives wherever the sky is. Our God is the sun and the moon too. And our God is our people. If we remember to stay here on this consecrated land, this is where we're supposed to be. And if we leave, we lose God.' Did she explain the above to the teacher?" I asked. "No." "Why?" "Because she thinks God is a person, and if I told her, she'd give us that smile." "What smile?" "The smile that says to us, 'You are kids. You're cute, but you're dumb. You're different, and you're all wrong.'" Now, I don't know how many of you have seen that smile when you were a child in Sunday school and you asked a question that the teacher did not want to answer, or when you made a statement about, I think about Rachel Held Evans, who's one of my favorite people's bloggers to read. And she talks about when she was a little girl and she asked, well, why did God kill all the animals when Noah got on the ark? Why did he kill all the animals that were left on earth? And her question was quietly dismissed by the Sunday school teacher and was never answered. I think about that, and that's the smile that she probably got when she asked that question. I think about times when I have been that child in Sunday school or in vacation Bible school and asked a question or had a thought that I knew that couldn't even ask the question that I had because I knew that I would get that same smile. But the problem is that smile that we give to kids when we pat them on the head and say, "Aren't you just so cute?" doesn't help them to understand or to be able to express or articulate who they are or who God is. And so I want to give us some understanding of children's development and of how we can better address children when they do start to ask those types of questions. So I want to go over some academic things about child development that I've learned over the years that have been helpful to me in my ministry with children. The first theorist that I want to talk a little bit about is Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson is a psychologist, and his theories are classic theories that are taught a lot in child development classes. His theory of development is an 8 stage theory. I'm only going to go over the first 4 stages because those are the ones that pertain to children, because his theory of development goes all the way through adulthood. And he was his theories, his stages, each stage has a basic crisis that has to be addressed in each stage of development, according to Erikson. And there's a basic outcome that is the desired outcome of each of those. So the first stage is infancy, and it is birth to about 18 months, according to Erikson's theories. So the primary crisis in infancy, according to Erikson, is trust versus mistrust. And the primary goal is for them to find hope, to learn hope. So infants, they need to know that they can trust their caregivers. They need to know that they are going to be cared for. When they cry, they need to know that someone's going to be there to pick them up, to hold them, to meet their needs. And if somebody isn't, then that can create trust issues throughout their life where they don't always trust people, where they struggle to trust people. But if they're well cared for, then they can learn how to trust people throughout their life. The second stage, the toddler stage, is from about 2 years old to about 3 or 4. And this stage is the autonomy versus shame, and this is the stage where will starts to develop. And it's also the stage where children begin to feel a sense of shame or a sense of self-esteem. And the way that they do that is by learning to do things for themselves. And so at this stage, we need to encourage kids to, if there's something that they can do, we need to encourage them to do it for themselves rather than us do it for them. And sometimes when we discourage kids in this stage, it's because we know we can do something faster or easier than they can. And it's not really about them being safe in doing something, but more about our own convenience. And the way to really help children to develop their own sense of will and their own sense of autonomy is by letting them do it, even if it takes longer, even if it's harder for them to do, letting them do it. Let them tie their own shoes, even if it takes 5 minutes where you can do it in 30 seconds. And again, this is important for them to develop a sense of self-esteem and a sense of autonomy of, I can do this. The preschool stage, the 3 to 5 or 6 year old stage, is the stage where kids start to ask the question why. They start to ask all kinds of questions. It's the stage where they start to develop purpose. It's the crisis here is initiative versus guilt. And it's the stage where if you keep telling a child no in this stage, no, don't ask that, or you keep trying to turn their questions of why away because their questions can get overwhelming. They ask a lot of questions in this stage. And sometimes they will ask the same question over and over and over and over and over again. But if we keep turning them away and we keep frustrating them in the stage, then they eventually develop a sense of guilt, a sense of, I'm bugging people when I ask a question, so I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to voice my thoughts or my questions. And they begin to become shy and turn inward. And so Erickson says that we need to encourage their questions and answer them in very clear language that only answers the question. Don't give them more information than they need, but answer their questions as truthfully as you can. The other thing about this stage is don't give them more than they need, and don't give them an answer that's not true. So don't answer them because you need to give them an answer. If you genuinely don't know why something is, it's okay at this stage to tell them, I don't know. Maybe we can find out together. As opposed to giving them an answer that may or may not be true or maybe only half true. Because that encourages them to continue to grow and develop and to learn things for themselves, as opposed to just accepting an answer and shutting down. The next stage is the school age stage. It's ages 6 to 12. This is the last of Erickson's stages I'm going to talk about. And this is a stage where kids begin to develop a sense of competence. And it's industry versus inferiority. This is the stage where they begin to feel good about what they do and the things that they do. This is the stage where they begin to be creative and also begin to collaborate and work together with their peers and begin to ask questions of each other and learn things from each other. And so this is an important stage also in faith development of them learning how to express how they understand God or how they see themselves or how they can do things to better change or the world around them and make the world a better place. So this is that creative stage of development that is beginning in that 6 to 12-year-old age. So going back over that really quick, trust versus mistrust, and the goal is hope. Autonomy versus shame, the goal is will. Initiative versus guilt, the goal is purpose. And industry versus inferiority, and the goal is competence and creativity. And so those are Erickson's basic understandings and breakdown of how children develop emotionally and socially. James Fowler is a theologian who took Erickson's understanding of those stages of development and applied them to faith development. So Fowler, there are 3 primary stages that apply to children in Fowler's faith development theory. And they very much line up in some ways with Erickson's stages. Fowler's first stage he calls stage 0. It's the primal or the undifferentiated stage. And this is, again, the stage where kids learn how to trust. And Fowler's understanding is that as kids learn how to trust their parents or their caregivers, that it lays the foundation for them to eventually be able to trust God and that God will care for them. If mom and dad care for me, then I can trust that God will care for me. His second stage is the intuitive projective stage. This is the stage where children tend to mix up the fantasy with the reality. They start to understand Santa Claus or maybe superheroes or maybe princesses this is that 3 to 7-year-old stage. And they start to incorporate those fantasy things and kind of overlap them with their understanding of God and people. And so at this stage, they may not be able to differentiate those things, but understanding those things can become an important foundation for them as they continue to develop and to be able to differentiate. The next stage is the mythical literal stage. And this is where they begin to really find the stories. This is the 6 to 12-year-old stage, and they begin to learn the story of creation or the story of Noah and the ark, or the story of Jesus healing the 10 lepers. And they begin to understand those and tell those stories and retell those stories in creative ways. They also begin to understand that there are more purposes and meanings behind those stories. But they still take those stories very literally. They literally believe in a 7-day creation, or they literally believe in some of those stories that we may later on in life learn that maybe we don't need to take them so literally. At this age, they take them very literally. And so those are Fowler stages when it comes to children. Um, Now, there is another school of thought, and some people will say that this other school of thought is in stark contrast to Fowler or Erikson. But I think that it actually can weave together with Fowler and Erikson. And the reason I say that is because to me, when I read Fowler and Erikson, it's in some ways like reading a systematic theology. And if you're a theologian, then you understand what a systematic theology does. It takes a very complex concept of God, and it breaks it down into ways that we can digest and understand, but maybe doesn't paint the complete picture. But it's a way that we can relate to and understand and learn from, and that's what I think of when I hear Erikson and Fowler stages. But there is another school of thought, and that other school of thought is called the spiritual child movement. And I was first introduced to this through an article that I read that was published in 2016, and it was a research article on children's spiritual lives and the development of a children's spiritual measure. And that research article pointed to the Child Spirit Institute and a man named Tobin Hart. And you can look up the Child Spiritual Institute online, and there is a website for it that gives you resources. But one of the things that Tobin Hart says is that that children have a deeper, broader understanding of the spiritual. But what they lack is the ability to express that. They lack the language to express that. And so the research article found is in particular 3 areas that children really understood deeply, but they didn't quite know how to express. The first is the area of comfort, that God is a God that can comfort us, and that He comforts us through prayer, and that He comforts us through thinking about God, and through imagining what God is like, and imagining how God can come alongside of us. The second area is omnipresence, that children really understood deeply that God watches over us, that God is present with us, that God knows us, that God listens to us. Even though you can't see Him, you can't touch Him, they still understood that God is there. And the third is duality, that children really understood the duality of body and soul, or body and spirit, based on their theological backgrounds. And that even children that maybe don't come from a church background even had an understanding that there is a part of us that is physical, and that there is a part of us that is beyond physical. And so when I think about that, I think about the why questions. I go back to the why questions that Erikson talks about, and to the creativity that begins to develop that Erikson talks about. And so I see those as ways that children are trying to put words and put images and express those deep understandings that they really do have. They just lack the language. And so the last thing one more thing I want to share with you, and then I'm going to share a story, is this. So one of the things, in addition to being spiritual caregivers, we also are emotional caregivers as well, as ministers and as chaplains. And with children, just like they lack the language for the spiritual, they also sometimes lack the emotional language. And so this is one of my favorite resources. This is off of therapistaid.com. You can find this. And it is a children's emotion wheel. I use this with my pediatric spirituality groups on behavioral health a lot. And you can see it has 6 basic emotions. And it gives you the faces to go with those and the basic words to go with those. And then it takes each emotion a little bit deeper. And this is a good way to give children some more language for emotions, just like answering those why questions is a good way to give them some more language for the spiritual. But I want to close with a story, and this is a story that happened to me when I was a first-year chaplain resident. I was working with a family. It was a large family, and I was working with two other chaplains with this family because this family was so large. But the patient had been involved in a gang fight and had been neurologically devastated. The family had chosen to donate his organs, so he was on a respirator to keep him alive until they could harvest his organs. And when I walked into the room, the patient's 12-year-old younger brother and 6-year-old daughter were both in the room, and they were in the corner of the room talking. And the 12-year-old brother was trying to explain to the 6-year-old that her daddy had died. And she said, "But Dad's right there, and he's still breathing. I can still see him breathing." And so the 12-year-old turned to the 6-year-old and said, "Dad's body's still there, but his soul isn't there anymore." And the 6-year-old turned to me, knowing that I was a chaplain. I had met them the day before. And she turns to me and she says, "Chaplain, I don't understand. What's a soul?" And it gave me the opportunity to sit down with both her and the brother. And I started asking her some questions. I asked her, "What are the things that you love? What are the things that are unique about you? What are the things that make you happy?" And when I started asking her and she started answering these questions, I was able to tell her, okay, well, those things are not part of your physical body, are they? Those are things outside of you. And she said, yes, yes, those are not part of my body. Those are part of my heart. And I said, well, the soul is the part of you that makes you happy. It's the part of you that makes you love those things. It's the part of you that makes you unique. And she, I could see in her face, she suddenly got this understanding. So the soul is in our body, and it's what makes us who we are. And then she asked, well, why is my daddy's soul not in his body? And I explained in very simple terms, sometimes our bodies are too sick or too hurt, and our soul can't stay inside of it anymore. And I knew this family was a Christian, and so I talked to her about how when that happens, our souls will go to heaven. And so that our souls can live on because our bodies can't live anymore. And I think that it was a good way to understand. I tried to keep the answers, again, to illustrate, I tried to keep the answers very much to her questions. I didn't give her too much information, but I wanted to give her a way to express what it meant that her dad's soul wasn't in her body anymore. So I hope that this gives you some practical application, some ways to work with children regarding spirituality and emotions, and some new ways to apply to your ministries wherever you work with children. Thank you.